After 2 long years of waiting, it's finally here. Shadow of the Erdtree.
And after 40 hours of gameplay spread across a week and a half, I'm finally ready to bring you my review. Now, I wanted to do this review a lot sooner, but I thought I should at least beat the DLC before I did any sort of review. But since that hasn't happened yet, and I don't want to wait until the hype dies down to post a video about this, I'm just going to go ahead and do it anyway. Now, I will say I've done everything except beat the final boss, and he has proven to be, at least to me, probably the hardest boss in Elden Ring yet, but we'll get more into that toward the end of the video when I give my top 10 hardest bosses of the DLC. Now, there are a few topics that are causing some discourse online that I'd like to discuss in this video, but before we get into that, I want to give my initial thoughts and opinions about the DLC. So I'll start by saying that even though this DLC is not perfect, I absolutely loved every minute of it. Even when it took me way too long to get through a boss, and I was on the verge of losing my freaking mind, the feeling of satisfaction when I came out victorious in the end completely outweighed my feelings of rage before that moment. Playing this made me feel as if I was playing the base game for the first time again. Not necessarily like in difficulty, but more in the experience of exploring and finding new weapons and spells and trying to figure out how the bosses work after you've died 1,000 times. And I just had an absolute blast playing this expansion. This has probably been the biggest DLC I've ever played. Looking back at ones from before, I don't really think they were this expansive. And I don't know exactly the size comparison between this and the base game, but it feels as if it's at least like a third of the size of the base game. I read somewhere that Miyazaki stated, and I'm just paraphrasing here, that the DLC was going to be about the size of Limgrave, if not slightly bigger, but I do think it was definitely bigger. I feel like it could compare more to if Limgrave, Weeping Peninsula, and a little chunk of Caelid were one map. However, I do feel that even though the map is that big, there are a lot more open areas in the DLC that are just like open fields with not a lot going on. Not that that's necessarily like a complaint or an issue I have, it's just more of an observation. And I feel that even though the map is the size that it is, there's still a little less content in that size of an area than say the base game. But like I said, this DLC wasn't perfect. I mean, it was pretty close, but I do have some small complaints, and these are more personal annoyances than they are real issues with the game. The first one being the performance issues that a lot of people online are complaining about. My experience wasn't as bad as some. I personally only experienced it a little bit in the beginning, and then after I fought the Divine Beast Dancing Lion, I think that's his name, the issues stopped. But during that boss fight was when it was at its worst. I mean, anytime he would go for a big attack and there was so much going on screen, you'd start to see it skip a little bit. But now where I'm at right now is fighting Radon, and he's just as crazy and sporadic, especially in phase 2, and I'm not having that issue at all. And full disclosure, I'm playing on PlayStation 5, so I don't know if the performance issues have been more with PlayStation players versus PC players, but that's the little bit of problems that I've seen. And like I said, I can't really complain much about this because it only happened right at the beginning. The next problem was more of the real annoyance for me, and that was the complete randomness and difficulty of the bosses. And I mean this in two different ways. The first one being that some bosses in later parts of the game, where the game should be hard, were a lot easier than bosses in the early stages of the DLC, and vice versa. Like, I know technically speaking, as you go through the game, you level up, bosses get easier, but like, this is a FromSoft game, so like the further you get into the game, the more difficult the bosses should be. Like, for example, and full spoilers on this, but toward the end, like after you defeat Mesmer, you need to take his flame or a spark or whatever it's called and go to this the ceiling tree and burn it so you can get to the final boss area. In order to do that, you have to defeat Romina, Saint of the Bud, I think her name is. So for a boss that you have to beat to get to the final boss, I feel like she should be one of the hardest ones. But I could probably face 3 of her at one time and still have less difficulty than with a tree sentinel. Like, she was way too easy. Like I said, it's not that this makes the game bad by any means. It was just more annoying that, like, I just felt like the bosses should have been harder by that point. But there were also some of the earlier bosses that felt like it was just going to go on forever and I was never going to get out of it. The other point of randomness I wanted to mention was that it felt like each time I opened the game, it randomized and picked out bosses that were going to be more difficult or less difficult. Like, for example, there was one boss that it was Meteor, the Mother of Fingers. I could not get past one evening. Like, I spent probably 30, 40, 50 attempts trying to get past her, and I couldn't do it. And I finally gave up, went to bed, and then the next evening when I came back, it was one attempt, and I wasn't even trying. Like, I was just doing extra damage, and just things were working out better than usual. And same thing with, I believe it's pronounced the Protrucent Knight. Correct me if I'm saying that wrong. But same thing. It took me, 40, 50 tries to get to it, and then I quit. And then the next night I come in, 2 attempts. That was it. Like I said, it's not that it makes the game bad, but I was just so annoyed with it because I spent so hard trying to slowly whittle these enemies down for me to go in the next day and it just be bam, bam, done. Now, speaking of difficulty, there's a topic of discourse that I'm going to discuss now, and that is how I see almost everyone online complaining about how hard this DLC is. I have seen review after review, tweet after tweet about how hard this DLC is. And I'm going to preface what I'm about to say by saying that everyone is entitled to their own views, own beliefs, own opinions, your own experience. Okay? I understand that. Not one person's thought is the most absolute opinion. And I will not judge anyone for thinking differently than me. But this DLC is not much harder than the base game, with the exception of a few bosses, because there are some that are much more difficult than Melania, and Melania, in my opinion, was the toughest boss of the base game. But I think that review bombing a game or a DLC because it's a little too hard for you to figure out is a bit silly. If this game were to have poor graphics, bad mechanics, glitching, bad story, totally understand it. Review bomb it all you want. Throw that game in the dirt because, we're at a point in time in video games where we deserve better than a half-assed product for full price. But if your problem is just that the game is a little too difficult, then this game is not really meant for you. This game was made for those who want a challenge, who want to push through the almost impossible bosses and get the victory and have that feeling of satisfaction. If FromSoft games are too hard for you, then they're not for you. This discourse has grown so much to the point that even the Helldivers 2 creative director posted on his Twitter, commented on someone else's post, but said, "A game for everyone is a game for no one. Always cater to a select audience." And I 100% agree with him. You shouldn't make every game to appease everybody. There has been a long-standing fan base for the Soulsborne games, and this game was meant for them. So just because Elden Ring's got a bit more popularity than some of those others, and there's been a lot more people come in and play it, and now they're all like, "You need to make this easier for us because we can't do it and it's too hard." Shut up. Let us enjoy the game. But moving on from that, this is the part of the video where I want to give my top 10 hardest bosses of the DLC. This is solely based on my experience and nothing else. I understand that some people are going to disagree with me. If you do, drop down in the comments and let me know that I'm wrong. I'd love to have a conversation with you about it. I want to know what your experience is and how it compares to mine. So please drop something in the comments. So before I begin, I want to tell a little story real quick. The other day, June 26th to be exact, I was scrolling through Twitter, or X if you want to call it X, and I saw a post from IGN giving their top 10 hardest bosses of the DLC. I disagreed with some of it, but I wasn't going to go and start commenting a bunch of hate to IGN or whatever. But I did want to like start up some chatting and everything and see, you know, what everyone else thought about it. So I gave my opinion of it. I went in there and posted, or I was retweeting it and gave my thought about it. I hit send, and then I noticed the post didn't have their post below it. It just had a link. So I clicked the link, and while typing mine out, they deleted their post. So my assumption is that everyone hated IGN's list and was talking shit on it, and decided to remove the post altogether. But before they did, I took a screenshot of it. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what their list was, and then we'll compare it to mine right after. So I'm going to pull it up on the screen right now. Their number 10 was Romina, Saint of the Bud. This is the one I was complaining about a second ago. I 100% disagree. She shouldn't even be on the list. It felt like I could have fought 3 of her, would have been easier than fighting a tree sentinel. It was 3 or 4 hits, first try was done. So her being on the list and Bale not even being on the list is just ridiculous. So number 9, and I was corrected on how to pronounce this, but it's Erdtree avatar, not Erdtree. To me, this one should have been higher on the list, especially above Divine Beast Dancing Lion. Number 8 was Meteor, Mother of Fingers. Number 7 was Divine Beast Dancing Lion. 6 was Rilana, Twin Moon Knight. 5 was Midra, Lord of Frenzied Flame. 4 was Petruscent Knight. 3 Commander Gaius, 2 Mesmer the Impaler, and 1 Promised Consort Radon. There's only 1 on this list that I actually agree with. A lot of these bosses are on my list, but they're just in different orders. So I'm going to go through and kind of explain why. Number 10, we have Rilana, Twin Moon Knight. I'll be honest, she barely made the mark to begin with. I just felt no difficulty from this boss at all. I think it was like 3 attempts, and it was just because I was trying to learn the moveset. There was really no difficulty whatsoever to this. Number 9 is Jory, Elder Inquisitor. And to be honest, I can't even really remember why it was so difficult. Like, I just couldn't get past all the quick succession spells coming at me. And that was a point in my playthrough that I hadn't leveled up my Spirit Ash at all. So like my Mimic tier just wasn't doing anything. Number 8 is Midra, Lord of Frenzied Flame. This one kind of shocked me at how low it got on my list. I was expecting it to be much higher. I knew it was coming before I actually played it, just because of TikTok spoiled me on a lot of things. But I think that one was probably 10 attempts. Like it wasn't too bad. It was annoying to say the least, especially since that's another one. The Mimic tier just wouldn't do its job. I had a lot of issues with the Mimic tier in this DLC, and I don't know why, because I did have it leveled up by then, but it just wouldn't function properly like it did in the base game. Anyways, moving on to number 7, which I think is going to be a shock to a lot of people, and that's Mesmer. Mesmer is 7th on my list. Mainly because, like, yes, he was much more wild and sporadic with his movements than, say, Melania was. I do think he was harder than Melania, but compared to the other bosses I had more difficult time with, you kind of learned his move set pretty quickly. Like, he became predictable after about the 5th attempt. And so with that in mind, it was pretty easy to kind of figure out, like, okay, which weapons work best against him, which don't, and I think by like the 12th or 13th attempt, I kind of had it done and he was gone. Which really surprised me, because looking online, I saw a lot of people were having issues with him, and he was like 2nd hardest boss to a lot of people. I mean, specifically IGN as well. Yeah, he really wasn't that hard. A friend of mine got him in 1 attempt. Like, I don't think Mesmer is as bad as people are saying. I think just because he was so sporadic and wild and chaotic with his movements that people just like were kind of being frantic and panicky and not focusing on where to roll into or away from, or how to dodge certain attacks and everything. And you got to remain calm in those type of moments. Number 6 on my list is the Erdtree avatar. This one was another one of those that irritated me, because I spent probably 20 attempts fighting and I couldn't get it. This was actually, I wish I was streaming or at least recording this, because it has 3 phases, and you get it down to the first one, and it disappears into dust like they all do when they die. But then there's no banner on the screen saying enemy felled. There's nothing saying what items I want. It's just quiet for a few seconds. And I'm like, this is bad. It's going to have a phase 2. And then phase 2 comes. And then it's like, okay, cool. It's a little bit more aggressive. I'm doing a bit more damage, so that's good. Maybe it's a bit weaker. And then you kill it, and the same thing happens. And you have phase 3, and it's even more chaotic and with more spells and everything. And phase 3, it killed me. And this is on like attempt 2 that I got it to phase 3 the first time. After that, it took me the remaining like 20 something attempts to get back to that point. And I had quit after so many attempts because it was just getting ridiculous. And I came back to it like 2 days later and got it in the first try. And it's one of those things that I don't understand. Like, does the game actually pick out like bosses that are easier or harder each time you load up the game? I know that sounds crazy, but it feels like that sometimes. Number 5 is another one I think might surprise people, and that's Bale the Dread. I know a lot of people would have had that higher on their list. What's odd is that this one, although it took me less attempts to defeat than say some of the others, those first few attempts were extremely difficult trying to figure out what his movesets were, what he did when, like timing everything properly. And then it wasn't until one of the guys I was online with had mentioned, hey, there's someone you can actually summon in there to help out. And once I did, that was the attempt that I got him. And I think if I hadn't been told that, that fight would have taken me a lot longer to defeat. But just because someone mentioned, hey, there's a summon that you can have instead of your mimic tier for that, and because I had Igon and my mimic tier going at the same time, that's the only reason I was able to defeat Bale. So again, for those of you who are complaining that the DLC was too hard, there are mechanics in the game that help make it a lot easier. You just have to use them. Now, these next 3, so 4, 3, and 2 on the list, have an asterisk by them because they're all about the same, and it's all of them have the same problem. Number 4 being Metyr, Mother of the Fingers. Number 3 being Commander Gaius, and number 2 being the Patrusant Knight. And I think they're all pretty much the same difficulty. I just numbered them in, or I ordered them in how many attempts it took me. So I think all of them were roughly 50, 60 attempts, which is crazy. So my big problem with these 3 is that I had a harder time learning the timing of their attacks. Like, there'd be a few turns in a row where I think I'd finally get the hang of it, and then they'd completely change up their moveset a little bit or change the order of how they do things. I put the Patrusant Knight a little higher because, 1, it took me more attempts, but 2, I couldn't dodge hardly anything. Like, he would do his attack, and then he'd jump off his horse, do his attack, you'd dodge, and then as you're trying to get him with something else, his horse is coming at you from both sides, and I couldn't dodge it for some reason. I'm rolling and jumping and everything. I couldn't dodge it. And obviously that makes my number 1 Radahn, mainly because I haven't beaten him yet, and I think I've had 60 something attempts. And of course, not even 20 minutes after recording this video, I get on the game and this happens, my very first attempt. Heal. Holy shit, I did it! I'm going to keep pushing through and beat him because he's the last thing I have left to do. But I have wanted to quit this one so bad, way more than I've ever wanted to rage quit any other boss in Elden Ring. And because after the first like 20 attempts, I finally got it to where I was like quarter health every time. Like, I got him down to quarter health every time. And last night, at the time of recording this, I got the closest I had ever been. There were 2 or 3 attempts in a row where he had maybe 2 or 3 hits left, but he got me with some big attack before I could get him. But I had my final attempt last night. I had him down to like 1 hit left. We were like on 1 pixel. I was on 1 pixel. We both swing our weapons, And even though I see my weapon go through him first, it registered his attack first, and it let me die and not him. I've never raged so hard at a game before. And even though I absolutely hate Radon right now, and I don't want to go back in there and play it right now, I'm still going to push through because this is one of my favorite games ever. And even though it's raising my blood pressure through the roof and my doctor is afraid for me right now, I'm gonna push on. I wish I would have been recording or streaming when I was fighting Radon, because my reaction would have gone viral. So anyway, that is my top 10 hardest bosses of the Elden Ring DLC. I hope you guys enjoyed my review of the expansion. Please let me know down in the comments what you thought. If you want to talk about the DLC a bit, I'd love to chat with you. And please make sure to like and subscribe here on YouTube, and go ahead and follow me on Twitch. I stream every Sunday and Tuesday, and typically every other Thursday. Just depends on if I'm busy. And with that, we'll see you next time.